Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell, and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. On this episode, I interviewed two professional financial planners to discover what are the most common questions that they receive when working with Canadians. And then we set out to tackle those questions on this episode. Our two guests are going to cover what the most important or frequently occurring blind spots are that us Canadians tend to make in our own finances. We also cover how to know if you are on track to reach financial independence and retire early, or if you have enough to retire comfortably. We cover all this and more as we tackle the top questions that Canadians have here in Canada. Our guests today are Hannah McVean and Thuy Lam from Objective Financial Partners. They are both fee-for-service financial planners. They and their firm don't sell any investments and instead focus on providing unbiased, conflict-free financial planning advice. Hannah was actually a guest on our January episode with Jason Heath, and that was our most popular episode this year. So it's great to have her back, along with Thuy, to get multiple perspectives on these most popular questions that Canadians have. And now, let's get into the interview. All right, Hannah and Thuy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much. Thanks, Cornell. Great to be on here.
Yeah, nice to have you back, Hannah, and Thuy, nice to have you on for the first time. I'm really looking forward to it. We did a bit of a pre-interview discussion, and during our pre-interview discussion, you both mentioned that one of the most popular reasons that Canadians reach out to you for advice is to see if they have any blind spots or if there's anything that could be done better when it comes to their finances, financial planning, and their investing. Can you each take us through some of these important or frequently occurring blind spots that we should be on the lookout for in our own finances?
For sure. Yeah, we work with a ton of DIY investors, and I think Thuy and I both love working with these people. I even find that some of these DIYers have developed their own financial plans or spreadsheets that can actually be very sophisticated. But a common blind spot that they're actually aware of is how to factor income tax into like a retirement plan, for example, or how to integrate government benefits like CPP, OAS, and actually even GIS. And then personally for me, I find another common blind spot I see is working with couples who are near to retirement or well into retirement. Sometimes the person who's been managing the money in the partnership has a different idea of what a secure retirement can look like versus the other partner. So I find that's a blind spot sometimes people aren't quite aware of. Thuy, what about you?
Yeah, that's a great point. I would echo Hannah's opinion and perspective on the tax planning side of things. That's a big one for me that I see. In addition to what Hannah's mentioned, ways to hold investments tax efficiently, especially for couples who are aiming to retire early. That's when it's really, really important. The use of spousal RSPs and just knowing that certain rules, if you don't have a defined benefit plan, then, to kind of keep in mind that when you turn 65, you might want to convert at least some of your RSPs to risks so that you can take advantage of the income splitting opportunity as well as the pension income tax credit. So that's one aspect. And the other one I call income spreading. So meaning if we have insight or you yourselfers have insight into their taxable income bracket today and all the way into the future, it's about spreading out your income so that you don't see big jumps in your income and have to pay or be liable for more taxes in one particular year. So that's one. Another one I see is I've actually come across quite a few where I've seen portfolio concentration risk. And it happens actually quite a bit with employees of companies where there's company shares, like a deferred profit sharing plan, stock options, and those Google, Apple employees, and even small business employees. I do see a large concentration where it wouldn't be common to see about 50% of their portfolio in one stock. So that's taking on additional risk that perhaps they're not aware of, right? Because we all want to support the company that we work for. I think that's a couple of common ones I see. And along with non-registered investments, not being aware of the importance of tracking their adjusted cost base on their investments. So again, a tax consequence.
I noticed too with the adjusted cost base, when people use that, during the end of the tax season, the brokerage does send that information over to the government, right? And they give you those slips and you can actually see what you made, that kind of a thing. Do you find those can be inaccurate at times? And so you really should be tracking it yourself as well, in your experience?
So here's the thing is, when I talk to accountants, basically we have an onus to track our own adjusted cost base. So as you mentioned, some investment dealers, some record keepers, they do provide it with the information. And, it could be on the non-registered statement as book value or cost. However, the onus is on the investor to track that and to ensure that's accurate. So I kind of, in my opinion, feel more comfortable also tracking alongside. I've done it on my own investments, and I find that they've been fairly good. The discount broker I use, they've been off a couple of times just in terms of foreign exchange.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
I'll add another nuance to that because we prepare personal tax returns at our firm, and you'll see sometimes it's less common these days, but even this last tax season found some statements don't have the ACB accurately recorded on your statement of securities dispositions, the T5008. But a problem I see sometimes is in-kind transfers from one institution to the other. That's where I see sometimes a lot of mistakes in the ACB. So Twee's got a great point. Tracking can be a smart call.
That's a great point. I recently moved some of my investments over just because Wealthsimple had a really good promotion. So I moved some of my things over just to get, the bonus. Like I still have a bunch of my investments with Questrade, but then I had some to take advantage of the promotion. And so, this is, and I imagine, and I know just being in this community, a lot of people do that where they will switch brokerages to some of these really nice promotions. I mean, some of the cash bonuses you get by moving some of your money over can be pretty substantial. Yeah. So thank you for that. I'll have to, use a bit of a magnifying glass over the tax season just to make sure that things are, because I made sure everything got transferred, but you're right. There's that second component with, okay, did they actually, on the ACB
did they record
side?
It? Yeah.
Did they record it and capture it correctly?
Sometimes they'll record the value on the date of transfer. I've seen that mistake happen before, which of course is not at all what it is. So something to just keep in mind. You could easily lose track of it if it's been a year or two, could easily happen.
Yeah. And for the investors listening, just in case you're new to any of this, when we talk about adjusted cost base, that's more so if you are investing in a taxable account or also known as a non-registered account. So if you are just investing in your RSPs and TFSAs and you're just trying to max those out, you haven't started investing outside of those, then this doesn't really apply to you. So I thought I'd mention that in case people are panicking. What is this ACB thing? I have to start tracking. Yeah, so it's a bit different. But typically, and we'll get to this question later, but typically the recommendation is that you max out your TFSA and RSP first. And then once those are maxed out, and if you still want to invest more, because let's say you want to retire earlier, then your next kind of thing is, okay, now we'll start investing in non-registered accounts, also known as taxable accounts. And that's when things get a bit more complicated. And that's where what you're saying, you should actually be tracking the adjusted cost base. You have to learn about that. It's kind of like, instead of getting a prize and a pat on the back for maxing out your RSPs and TSA, instead it's, hey, good job. And now you get more work and more complication.
More work, more taxes.
It's so true. I don't like the admin side.
It's like, hey, you're pretty good at money. You were able to max these out. Great job. Now here's some complications just to keep you, stimulated in a mental way, perhaps.
True.
Yeah. But you mentioned that there are definitely a lot of DIY investors that do listen to the show and they do have their fancy spreadsheets, myself included. But I hear you about the taxation piece because one, it's constantly changing. Sometimes just the rates get adjusted, but things do tend to change from time to time. And then you mentioned as well, like the government benefits, things like that. And this will not just be retirement benefits. This could be like Canada Child Benefit as well.
That's right.
You want to factor that in if you have kids that are younger as well. And so then you start getting into things like clawbacks. And so it's this whole optimization puzzle of how do we actually pay the least amount of tax, but also maximize the benefits we're entitled to. And that stuff, it's so hard to model yourself in a spreadsheet. It's doable, but there's tax companies that exist, the TurboTaxes of the world, and like the professional software you guys use, where like this is what they do as their business because it is so complicated. There's so many variables and moving parts. So I think it's great that you guys help Canadians with that. Because like on the DIY investing side, I would say it's quite easy to do yourself these days with ETFs and index investing.
Agreed.
For sure.
Yeah, but when you get into all these moving variables, now you jump to a higher tax bracket. Now this benefit got changed a little bit. Now this clawback got changed. It can make your head spin. And then the amount of hours you'd have to invest to model all that out on a spreadsheet and do these changes annually.
I know.
I mean, it's not worth it.
I've had people ask me, they're like, how do I do this on my own? And I say, I'm so sorry. I don't know. I don't know how you do it without financial planning software. I don't know.
Exactly. It's a big enough thing where there's companies that specialize in this specifically to build the software to let you do that. So you're better off just working with a good accountant or like financial planners like you guys.
Yeah, I was like, hey.
Or you have
yeah, or a financial planner.
That's right. Because you guys can enter all those numbers in and then you can run optimizations. And what I think is nice with you guys as well, because you're not just accountants, is that you're not just going to file the taxes and that's it. You actually get into details about discussing some tax strategy and trying to do some forecasting and like what income tax bracket are they going to be in, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so it's not this like mechanical thing like filing your taxes every year. It's actual like strategic tax planning that you guys do. And then you put those numbers into the software and then you're actually able to run some different scenarios. So I'm always a big fan of companies like what you guys are doing where it's fee for service. You're not taking any commissions, nothing like that. You're not trying to push some products to sell. You just have the like expert advice, like the way a good lawyer would do. And you're just getting solid advice for your situation. Awesome. So moving on to the next question, can you take us through how you suggest Canadians evaluate the decision to pay down their mortgage quicker versus investing for retirement? I feel like the answer used to be a little bit easier when the interest rates were super, super low. And it's like, well, if I'm doing equities and I use like an 8% expected return on the equity side and my mortgage is just a few percent, then it kind of becomes, maybe I shouldn't say no-brainer because there's other factors that come into play, risk tolerance and all this kind of stuff. But it seemed like the answer was easier because there was such a big spread between what people were paying on debt versus what they can expect in equities long-term. Now, obviously, things have changed where the rates have gone up. Can you walk us through how should we be thinking about this for those that have a mortgage and they're torn? Should I go with this for sure thing where I'm paying down the debt? Or should I go more on the investing side?
I'd like to weigh in on that, actually. Just that point where you said the interest rate is guaranteed. That's what you said, by repaying the loan, which is an interesting point that you make because that's a very common argument. But mortgage terms in Canada are only 5 years, right? So sure, the mortgage, people with variable mortgages today might be over 6%, but who's to say what the rate will be when they renew? So once we're considering the full length of the mortgage, maybe it won't be 6%. Maybe it's 5 or 4 once you consider the entire length of that mortgage. So it's not quite even that easy because it's not a fixed rate for the entire length of the mortgage.
That's a great point. It's like a temporary guarantee because you know you're paying, but it's going to be 5 years. It could change so much in that time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's a good point that Hannah makes. I mean, I was just looking at the data, and in the last 10 years, our average mortgage, 5-year fixed mortgage, is 5.16. You hit it right there, right on the dot. So about 5.16, and we know if you're an equity investor, Canadian stocks returned maybe close to 8%, and if you had U.S. equities, somewhere around the 14%. So it's looking a little bit more. That's historical. We don't know if the future is going to be repeated. And that's where it is sometimes difficult to make this type of decision. And, Cornell, you made a really good point. Like an equity investor, growth investor, where might be a little bit easier to kind of sway towards the investing. Someone who's balanced or conservative, maybe paying down the mortgage more aggressively makes sense. So it does depend on your investor risk tolerance and what your asset allocation is. And I would also say it would depend on a couple of the pieces we talked about. Like if you're for paying down mortgage, you're using after tax dollars, right? So let's just look at $10,000. If you have $10,000 extra at the end of the day, it's going to get taxed. If you're earning $100,000, maybe your tax rate is 30%. So you're going to lose $3,000. Now you have $7,000 to work with. If you had our RSP contribution room, and if you had employer match, you're using now pre-tax dollars. You have the whole $10,000 working for you to invest, compounded. And also, if you have the employer match, now you're doubling. your contribution.
That can be
Potentially.
huge. Yeah, yeah.
It can be huge. And so that's why it's very different for everyone. And that's what we love to do, right? Is take a look at that holistic view in terms of, is there RSP contribution room? Is there TFSA room? What is their taxable income? Does it make sense for you to even invest in an RSP if you're making relatively lower income bracket? And the other piece too, I think is important is for a lot of young families, I bring up, the idea of liquidity. So if you're a young family with, kids and a big mortgage, lots of competing needs for your dollars, like funding their education, sometimes, even aside from the math, it might make sense to invest. So there's more liquidity.
I agree.
Available. Yeah. And then, thirdly, I think the emotional aspect of it. I find with a lot of people, they're just not comfortable with a big amount of debt. And considering, our real estate prices in the last decade, people are carrying heavy and large mortgages. And if it's impacting your sleep at night, then by all means,
not worth it.
That's going to sway. Exactly. That's going to sway the decision.
Agreed. I like to understand how people feel about debt, like how much, like we said, how much is this weighing on their mind? Like I find in the discourse online, there's a lot of financial planning topics are made to sound black or white. There's a right way to do things and a wrong way. And sure, sometimes if you look only at the interest rate and only the expected rate of return, when making this comparison, it can sometimes look black and white. But people do not behave like our projections. So addressing fear and creating peace of mind is extremely worthwhile in building future financial success.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I've spoken with people on the one end where they say, I'm not going to have a mortgage forever because they're a very high equity allocation investor. They feel comfortable with that, the high risk tolerance, all of that. And so that for them, it's like, why would I pay off my mortgage quicker? When I know I can get way more on equities. But then there's other people on the other end of the spectrum where that would stress, well, even having a high equity allocation alone would stress them out. And now you're going to do that and have this giant bet on top of that. And maybe they're retiring in 10 years. I mean, so for some people, that would be anxiety, high blood pressure through the roof. So that's a great point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if you're stressed and anxious, your brain is not working properly. So that means like you're probably not making decisions correctly. So that can actually impact your decision making around your finances. So it's genuinely worthwhile just from an actual future net worth perspective. Speaking of that, Cornell, one other just like quantitative factor I would say would be like how long the mortgage extends into retirement. In the modern world, like we said, big mortgage balances, not every retiree is going to have their mortgage paid off by retirement. So paying down can reduce the fixed expenses that a retiree is going to face in retirement. So that can reduce some risk in their retirement plan by having less fixed expenses that they have to fund.
Such a good point, Hannah. And that's where when we have insight of future expected income and expenses, it really helps to validate some of those decisions.
Exactly.
Those are some really good points. Yeah, one of my follow-up questions to this when I was preparing for this interview was, is there some rule of thumb calculation or something that you like to use? Or like some simple thing where, if interest rates on your mortgage are X and expected, let's say, return on equities is 8%, at what point is it always worthwhile to go to invest instead? But I'm going to not ask that question anymore because from your answer, that would not give us a correct answer because like you said, there are so many other variables, right? Like you mentioned the employer match, that alone is huge. You mentioned the pre-tax versus like the tax deferred, like if you're using the RSP. So you're able to kind of pull these different levers where one may actually become a way better choice than the other. And then of course, there's that psychological element that you mentioned as well, which can be a complete deal. Like even if the math says go invest, if now you've got to go on blood pressure medication because you're so stressed all the time that, I don't know, but the math is one thing, but you also want to live your life and not be in constant anxiety. So there's also that component as well. So that's a
Money's
great point.
A tool, right? I find sometimes as a financial planner, I do sometimes like to get people back on track with their thinking about what money is for. right? Like it's to live a better life, do the things you want to do, provide for your family, whatever it is that you want, what your goals are. The purpose of money is not to get as much money as possible, right? So if peace of mind is what you really want, then that's what we should be planning for, however we get there.
For sure. It's not like just making as much as possible is the
Aha,
end goal 100% of the time for any
Uh-huh.
situation. That's simply not
that's
true.
right. That's
For
right.
sure.
And there's people we work with, like, just to be clear, there's people we work with who are like, I don't care about this. I want to maximize my net worth as much as possible. Hey, great. That's what we're going to do. That's the nice thing about financial planning is we work with each person and we make sure that their financial plan fits who they are and their goals and everything about their situation individually, which is why rules of thumb don't typically work that well. But we accommodate the person. So if that's your goal, great.
That's great. So we still have a whole bunch of financial planning questions ready to go. But before we continue, I just want to mention that we did create a special page where listeners of the show can sign up to have a free introductory call with you guys. So with Hannah, with Thuy, or their team. And as well, they can get a discount if you actually do decide to work with Hannah, Thuy, and their team as well. And so that link for anybody interested, it's over at buildwealthcanada.ca/plan. So that's buildwealthcanada.ca/plan, just PLAN, because this is financial planning. So I thought, okay, plan's a good link to use. And that will redirect you right away to a page where you can sign up for that free introductory call. And then you get a discount as well. So thank you again for offering that to Build Wealth Canada listeners. And now, since the last time Hannah was on the show, I was told that you and your team, you've developed something new specifically for DIY investors when working with them. Can you tell us a bit more about this, and how is this different from the free introductory call and discount that you're already providing to Build Wealth Canada listeners?
Okay, so we use a couple of different financial planning softwares in our work, and we've recently partnered with a new software that has a client portal that we think will be particularly interesting to DIYers. We find that a lot of DIYers need a lot less support from us in the data collection phase of financial planning, those spreadsheets that you guys have. Users of this software do this data collection phase in a self-directed way. And we'll still work with you to make sure the information is accurate, of course, and then build strategies and present them to you so that you understand the plan. But the next great thing about it is that once we've agreed on a plan, it gets locked, but you can continue to access the portal and create scenarios to test how different strategies might impact your plan, like savings rates, accumulation strategies, deferring CPP and OAS, and see how all that might change your results. And I think that's really going to be interesting to DIYers while still receiving that peace of mind around financial complexity that you get by working with a planner. And you can sign up for this right away, of course, and do like a free trial. So if you want to do that, you can skip the intro call. But regardless, we'd still give the 10% discount to Build Wealth Canada listeners, whether they're using this new self-directed or, our more comprehensive planning option.
That's amazing. So you're saying the DIY investor can actually run different scenarios themselves. And
Exactly.
Then, that's awesome. And then they can
Yes.
get your actual professional, like unbiased second set of eyes to say, hey, did I interpret this correctly? Is this the right call? Here's what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? Is that how it
Exactly.
works?
Absolutely. Yes.
That's awesome. That's such a good idea.
It's amazing. We've just launched it, actually. It's fairly new. We launched it, Cornell, this month. And I've been having conversations with do-it-yourselfers, and they're excited. They're excited to have this at their fingertips, because that's the thing, right? If you've got multiple spreadsheets and you're very capable of doing it on your own, and you really just want that sounding board, that expert kind of advice to help with the strategy input and validation, or help to spot blind spots that they don't see and they can integrate into their plan, it helps to give that reassurance, that confidence. And then they're left with a plan that's sound, and Hannah mentioned, can manipulate and to take a look at different scenarios. What if I pay down my mortgage more aggressively? What if I invest instead with the extra dollars? Or what if I split the strategy? So they can see year over year projections of their income, their taxes, future growth of assets, declining hopefully in their liabilities, and what their future retirement could look like as well. And all those benefits that we talked about, that's all integrated in the system, in the software.
And they'll see behind the curtain, like you get to see what we see. You get to see it live. And there's a lot of people who have asked for this before we had access to it. They said, how can I play with this? Can I get a spreadsheet? Can I have access to this? So I think that'll be a nice thing. And the other really cool thing I like about this is we can project what are your account values projected to be at based on this rate of return. And you can track in the software how your plan is tracking in reality compared to what we projected it to be to see if you're on track regularly. I think it's so cool.
So important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds, and I imagine if someone wants to run a scenario, but let's say, oh, what if my spouse stopped working and I kept working, different kind of scenarios like that, but they're not sure how to model that out in the software. I'm guessing they can ask you guys and you guys can help them run that scenario, right? Okay.
We can still have a long-term relationship. A lot of our clients work with us on an ongoing relationship as things develop in their life. So once the initial plan's completed, of course, they can ask our support at any time.
That's great. Yeah. And that's really, I think it's a really good idea because I remember I've gotten so many questions over the years of DIY investors looking for a good financial planning software. And I have access to one just because I used to work for a financial planning software company. And and I'm in the industry, right? But I asked the company hey, can I recommend your software because I like it to listeners of the show? And they would say, not really, because this is meant for financial planners. We're assuming that this is from someone that is a CFP, that they're already trained in all this. And so they were kind of reluctant. They don't really have an offering for regular DIY investors because I think for them, it's maybe a liability kind of thing, right? Where they don't want someone playing with the software, coming up with their own conclusions, but then maybe they missed something because they never actually went through that formal training. And so I get that that's something that why
and that's fair.
Choose to go that way. And it's fair. So it's really neat how you guys just created this sort of hybrid thing where, okay, you can still use the software, but you're not all by yourself alone. You have the support of you and your team, and you can ask questions and you can help people model things out so that you have that support so that, again, you're not, there isn't anything that you missed by accident just because you don't have your certified financial planner designation or something like that.
Exactly. So the plan locking is kind of key. We've got the training. We know how everything interacts. And so we'll lock it this is your plan. You can test it, play with it, see how things turn out, but you wouldn't be able to lock your plan on your own. So if you wanted to change things, you might have a short call to just validate that you're on the right track and make that your new official plan. So I think that providers' concerns are valid, but this is a way to work with a financial planner and then still serve the DIY investor, the group.
The best of both worlds. So that's fantastic.
Sure.
That's great. Yeah. So we'll move on to the next question, but thanks for bringing that up. I didn't know that you guys actually have this thing now where DIY investors can actually go in and change their own numbers and things like that. That's really neat. Yeah. So that page, again, for anyone that missed it the first time, it's just buildwealthcanada.ca/plan, PLAN. And that'll basically, it's the same page that we used last time that you were on the show, Hannah. And then you can just enter your email there. And then you guys will basically be in touch. And then they can say, are they interested in this one? Or are they interested in something else? That kind of a thing. And then if anybody listening has trouble signing up, we had some people that had some trouble signing up last time, just I think through some browser the incompatibility issues or something. My email is on that page as well. So you can just reach out to me directly. And then I can basically reach out to you guys directly on the listener's behalf to make sure that everyone who wants to speak with you guys or wants to try this out is able to. So that's great. So buildwealthcanada.ca/plan. Thanks so much for thinking of this. This is really cool. I actually want to try it.
Yeah,
now.
I could tell. I'm you're personally interested. I can tell, which is great.
Well, we'd love to get your feedback.
Yeah. I'm making a mental okay, after the interview, ask if I can have access. This sounds awesome.
For sure.
And we forgot to mention one really important, I would say, feature of the software is there's AI involved. So AI is helping that do-it-yourselfer to say, what if you collected CPP at 60? What does your net worth look like? At age 90, what if you collected at age 65? So it's really smart. It kind of comes up with these different scenarios, and then you can apply the one that looks attractive to you.
So it has some of those scenarios that it will automatically do for you. So you don't have to know, because I imagine most people can think of a few scenarios they want to run, but it's hey, is there a scenario I should be running that I don't know about? And so I'm guessing this is where it can help.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
so it can't do everything, right? It's not it can't do everything, but it definitely has a lot of amazing ones. What if you pull income from your RSP up to this tax bracket every year? What if you defer CPP? What if you defer OAS? It has those are like the AI ones that are like, those would be the ones that I think would be really interesting for DIYers to play with.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's great. And then, of course, they have you guys still it's not like some fully automated
validate.
solution.
No.
The AI is
No.
like to get the ball rolling, get some ideas generated, run some scenarios, and then they would still speak to you guys or someone from your team
Yes,
to actually say, hey, maybe this one would be a good fit. Maybe we should tweak this one.
exactly.
That's really
right.
neat. That's fantastic.
Mhm.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing that. This is
Yeah, thanks, Cornell.
I always feel so nerdy because I get so excited about this stuff.
Don't worry, we do too.
We're in the same boat.
Yeah,
That's okay.
we're financial planning nerds too. Don't worry.
I've
Good
learned
company.
to embrace my financial planning nerdy side. That's fine.
Yeah.
No sense denying it anymore.
Yeah. No, not at all.
And now a quick message from one of our sponsors. There are so many opinions on how to invest your money today, but it can be hard to find credible voices to rely on in the world of finance and investing. One resource I turn to every week is the ETF Market Insights YouTube channel, led by today's episode sponsor, BMO ETFs. Market Insights brings in industry experts, and their weekly episodes cover the hottest themes like inflation, infrastructure, healthcare, and more. Tuning in helps me stay up to date on what's happening so I can be a smarter investor. And you can also submit your own ETF questions to be answered on the show. So do yourself a favor and subscribe on YouTube to ETF Market Insights or visit etfmarketinsights.com so you can be notified when future episodes go live. So yeah, let's get to some more questions. And again, thank you for mentioning that. So for those that do decide to focus on investing, the general rule of thumb, we talked about this a little bit before, the general rule in Canada is that the focus should be first on trying to max out all the contribution room that you have in your TFSA and your RSP. And then once those are filled up, you start investing in taxable non-registered accounts. Can you guys think of any cases or examples where that sort of general rule of thumb may not actually be the optimum course for someone?
Sure, I can provide some insight into that. I know that we already discussed about the difference between having RSP room and, the registered vehicles like your RSP to really be able to maximize your tax benefit. So if you don't, outside of that, I would say the few exceptions that I could think about is number one, what if you don't want to earmark the funds for retirement? So if that's the case, then maybe RSPs, maybe TFSA or non-registered is a better option. And that could be also the scenario for, as I mentioned earlier, the lower income earner. Like if your tax bracket, if you're making $50,000 or less, perhaps RSPs are not the right solution, right? Maximizing is not the right solution, and you'd be better off with another investment option. And I think the third maybe perhaps is for those first-time home buyers that are listening in, where we have access to the first-time home savings account, the FHSA, which works really well to help first-time home buyers to save and encourage them to save for their down payment on their first home. And fourth, I would say RESP, Education Savings Plan, where we have the opportunity to attract grants of 20%, right? And per child. And so that becomes very attractive as well in terms of competing for where should our extra dollars go other than inside RSPs and TFSAs. Yeah, I would say outside of maxing RSPs and TFSAs, this kind of would be the other exceptions to consider if you're in these circumstances before.
I've got one to add too. Yeah, those are awesome points, Tweet. I've got one to add. Someone who's a US person, be that a citizen or even having a green card, might want to consider whether they want the hassle of a TFSA, especially if they're newly a resident and have just started accumulating room, because TFSAs are not a tax shelter in the US. So there is a filing requirement. So you have to file 2 forms. They have to be paper filed. You have to mail them to the IRS. And if you are late filing them, it's like $10,000 fine per form. So totally scary. And can you get this waived? Maybe. Can you file on time? Definitely. But I sometimes question how worthwhile it is if, say, you're only going to be in Canada for a few years, or you only have a couple years of TFSA contribution room, just have $20K or less of tax-free investment assets. Is it worth the hassle? I question that. But RSPs have more nuance. Like Tui made a great point. Like if your income's 50K or less, I can think of even another one. What if your income's 60K and you have a 10K pension adjustment or sort of pension deductions? That might be a case that creates the same result. That might be one. And this is like not really what you had asked, Cornell, but an interesting nuance is those who are already retired sometimes ask me if they should max out their RSP contributions if they have any unused room before the end of the year in which they turn 71. And in many cases, like that does not make sense. If you're already retired, do you really want to defer more income to a future year? Probably not. But there are cases where it can make sense, like to increase GIS benefits. If you've got one spouse, for example, receiving OAS already. One thing we didn't actually mention is the software that we have can model GIS clawback. And that is something that no other software can do right now, as far as I'm aware, no financial planning software. So that is another thing that I wanted to mention. But yeah, so sometimes RSP contributions can make sense even in a very unusual case for those who are already retired, very interestingly.
Yeah. He wants us to be aware of.
Do you know, Hannah, if your software is able to, the way you mentioned, it can help optimize things for GIS to make sure you're getting the least clawback possible or the most benefit. Does it do something like that for Canada Child Benefit as well?
Yes, it does.
That's huge. Okay.
Yeah, and tax credits, lots of stuff. Yeah.
Because I find that's a very big component as well when it comes to the whole optimization
For
piece.
sure.
So there is the clawback for Canada Child Benefit starts very, very early at pretty low income levels already. And so that becomes a whole, I know I've gone through this myself where, trying to figure out, okay, how can we maximize the Canada Child Benefit? So like, where should we pull the income from which account? That kind of a thing. Like in retirement, it adds a whole element to it. And it is complicated. So a software that can do that sounds very good.
Yeah.
Totally.
And Tui, I wanted to mention one just to add on to your point, because you talked about how if you have some money and you're not actually planning on using, like you want to use it now, and how I work with RSP, that might not be the best decision. What maybe some listeners don't know about is when you are taking money out of the RRSP, there is going to be typically, at least with the brokerages I've seen, like a deregistration fee, I believe it's called, that they will charge you. So it's like a one-time fee. I think it was like $70 or something the last time I checked.
75, with tax, or 50 or something like that.
And this is just for, I want to take some money out just so I can actually spend it. So if you're doing it like every month, let's say, that can start adding up. So that's another reason why, okay, maybe like basically the whole like liquidity piece where, okay, now you got to deal with that whole thing. And then also, and correct me guys if I'm wrong, but if let's say you need some money and you're retired, or you're like already retired or whatever the case may be, you're taking it out of your RSP. Now that's gonna, like in our case, like that would hit our income fully. So even though it's like a capital gain, it doesn't matter. It's fully hitting our income. And so now we're going to get bigger clawback on our Canada Child Benefit, right? Versus, wouldn't it be more optimal if instead I sold some investments in the taxable account, because now it's like a capital gain. So it's actually not going to increase our income 100% by that amount. And so now the clawback is actually going to be less. So that's like another complication, but worth considering, right?
And that is exactly what we love to do, right? That's the tax planning piece that we're talking about in terms of, tying it back to spreading out our income and having insight and pre-planning. That's why the benefit a lot of times of meeting with our clients, at least on an annual basis, to pre-plan, especially for those that are drawing from their investment. Is this a year where you actually want to do some home renovations? Or, are you planning to replace your vehicle? We've got a couple every 8 years, depending on when those car replacements. And so it really makes sense to plan in advance for these large lump sum withdrawals to fund our lump sum planning needs. So that's really important consideration. So aside from maxing out on RSPs and TFSAs, it's understanding what are some of our short-term needs. Do we have an emergency fund established, 3 or 6 months worth of expenses and or access to a line of credit? Do we have high interest debt? And maybe that becomes a little bit of a priority. And as I mentioned, the sinking funds for these home renovations or car replacements, to have them more liquid and not subject to the market ups and downs and not subject to a tax consequence if we needed to draw big lump sums to fund those needs.
Tax consequence, including benefit clawbacks. Yeah, exactly.
That yes, we see benefit clawbacks as a tax consequence. So
Exactly.
we kind of, you can have insight into, okay, what's my taxable income bracket going to be in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time? And oh goodness, I better plan in advance and spread out maybe my RSP withdrawals little by little. And then when I need a lot of cash, maybe it should come from my taxable accounts or perhaps even a little bit from my tax-free savings account if I've got huge capital gains.
Every person's
It's a little
different.
bit of very dynamic, very
Yeah.
dynamic. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for preparing so well for that question because it's not an easy one. And I mean, it's so easy, I think, when I think back years when I first started studying all of this, you read, let's say, 5 blog posts on the subject, and they're all saying, okay, max out your RSP TFSA first, and then worry about non-registered after. And it's like, okay, there seems to be some sort of consensus among the community here. That seems to be the best practice, and that's what I should do. But I love your answers here, just to acknowledge that, yes, that may be the correct answer in many scenarios, perhaps even probably the majority of scenarios for people, but there are these nuances as well. And so it is worth not just saying, okay, here's the one perfect answer, it's always the right answer, problem solved, let's move on. There are these other elements, and they can be quite significant. Like you mentioned, if someone's just optimizing for tax, great. But if it destroys the government benefits you receive, okay, it's not optimum anymore. Maybe you would have been better off doing things differently. So yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Okay. We want to oversimplify, but it's not, one should not always try to oversimplify.
Yeah. Unfortunately, financial planners are so annoying because if somebody asks us for some guideline, every financial planner says the same thing. It depends. And I know we're annoying that way. We would do public financial literacy presentations or podcasts like this. Yeah, you're like, here's 10 nuances off the top of my head that make that not apply. There's a lot of rule of thumbs that are great. But yeah, it's important to remember that not everything applies to you and your situation. And if things feel confusing because you've heard a bunch of different opinions, or you wonder, should I really be doing that in my own situation? The answer is your situation is actually as unique as you think. So it makes sense to be confused, to be honest. Yeah.
I think that's probably good screening criteria too for Canadians looking for a financial planner, where if they're speaking to someone that they think might be knowledgeable and they're just giving these blanket statements where X is always the right answer no matter what, without even really knowing your situation and knowing all the numbers, that to me would be a big red flag. That, okay, maybe ask them next, do you sell this product, or does your firm sell this product? Because I'd be willing to bet, if they're giving you this kind of very easy, straightforward answer, there might be a good chance that the company, or they sell that product and they get some sort of commission from it. Because like I've noticed that the more competent, knowledgeable the financial planner is, the more likely they are to say it depends, as opposed to giving blanket statements just because the experienced person is knowledgeable enough about these nuances, whereas the beginner who doesn't care about the nuances because they're really just a salesperson, they're more than happy to give these very easy answers, and so that they can move on to the next step, which is selling the product. Anyways, yeah, that's my little caveat. But I've noticed this pattern over the years where the oversimplified people tend to be salespeople more often than not. I've noticed.
Okay.
So once a Canadian investor ends up maxing out their RSP and their TFSA, what should they consider when deciding how to deploy the extra cash going forward?
I think Twee had a lot of great ones. Yeah. FHSA which was an awesome one. The RESP, that's an awesome one. I would also throw out our DSP. Our DSP is an amazing one if you have a family member with a disability, either usually a child. So our DSP stands for Registered Disability Savings Plan. And Twee mentioned that 20% grant on contributions into the RESP. Well, our DSP grants can be up to 300%. But I think another thing to mention is probably if you're deploying your cash flow, you should be prioritizing life insurance and disability insurance. Make sure they're adequate and up to snuff. I actually think this should probably come first before maxing out the registered accounts, but whichever order you're in, it's important to mention, particularly that disability insurance. Not all insurance is created equal, right? And it's tied to our employment, and not all employers are offering the same quality of disability insurance. A 2 to 5 year disability could destroy a family's net worth, right? Let alone a permanent one. So something to think about.
Very, very good point, about the insurance coverage. Yeah, to assess. A lot of times we do that for clients. We assess their group benefits versus what their actual insurance need is and what level of risk they are comfortable with taking on. And that's where we help to fill the gap in terms of what is the appropriate product solution.
Totally. And I think that's a really good use case for a fee-only, advice-only financial planner, because I think Canadians have an aversion to insurance, particularly insurance, feeling like they're being sold insurance. So that can be a good use case to be like, of somebody who is truly objectively in your corner being like, yes, you should have this insurance. It's a good one. I would recommend you get it. And not that their compensation being 0% tied to the outcome of you purchasing it. I think it's a really good use case for that.
Yeah, we were talking before we went online how I was speaking to my insurance person recently for the car insurance, and they were just pitching me, they're basically pitching me insurance investments, and it was just comical.
I can't believe it.
They're asking me like, oh, well, why do you invest in, index ETFs and all that kind of thing? And it was just kind of funny. But what I will say though is, for me, it was funny because they didn't know that I actually know a thing or two about this stuff.
Yes.
I feel embarrassed for him.
And Cornell, you probably know about 90% more than him when it comes to investing.
Well, I noticed though, this is not the first time I've dealt with someone like that. I will say though, from a sales marketing perspective, some of those guys really have I would say optimized sales pitches where they know what buttons to push on you, like what emotional triggers. They like for me, it doesn't work because I know the real thing. But for somebody, even if you have a parent maybe that you're helping manage their money or something like that, or someone younger who hasn't gone through the gambit or whatever, it is impressive from a sales marketing standpoint how they've optimized those sales pitches to know exactly to get you to act, the urgency, they use the fear thing as a motivator. I used to in school, marketing was one of my areas, and so we learned about all these different emotional triggers. And I remember just speaking to some of these insurance people, and it's they're hitting most of these. That's you can basically tell that they've been professionally trained in sales. They know what creates a reaction. And so I'm just saying this to, not to say everyone, I'm not saying all of them are like this or anything like that.
Not all of them,
But I do want to say that just for listeners to know that you do have to be on guard when it comes to this kind of thing, because their sales tactics are actually they're following best practices when it comes to sales. Not necessarily in terms of financial planning.
It's so true. And I'm so happy you mentioned that. I had one client recently I'm working with, and a lawyer and very high income and has the extra resources to deploy for insurance. And as it turns out, is paying upwards over $10,000 a month in insurance premiums. So long story short, in the end, he didn't really need all those policies, but he did say to me, Twee, so-and-so is really good salesperson. Yeah. And I've got to prep myself before meeting with him.
Oh,
yeah. Get your shield up a little bit. Yeah.
Yes. And be really confident in his decisions, right? Yes. If he had decided, I don't need this policy, or I want to shave this policy down, he had to prepare himself mentally for that particular meeting, because he knows he can easily get sold.
Yeah. Well, because when they go to the sales training, at least the skilled ones, they know the most common objections. They've been doing this for decades and decades at this point. So they have these list of common objections, and they have an answer for each of your objections. Yeah. And so to your point, Twee, how you have to have this shield up and ready, because they're going to no matter what you say, they probably have an answer that has worked on some people. And so you've got to push. But yeah, I bring this up to really just say that I totally agree with your point about how you really do want someone that is unbiased, like a fee-for-service financial planner, to look at that, because they're gonna give you those sales pitches, they're gonna give you the numbers. But if they can also sell you that product, then right away there's a potential conflict of interest. And so I would gladly pay a fee-for-service financial planner some money for unbiased second opinion before I start forking out thousands of extra dollars over the years for insurance.
Another point to mention is we have a network of trusted insurance advisors who treat our clients incredibly well. We trust them. There's none of this that you've just described. They make people feel great, trustworthy, and we don't receive any referral fees for referring people to them, because we want to maintain our objectivity. Yeah. So that's also an option. You don't have to just go out there to the wilds and hope for the best.
Yeah. I've had another situation like that where when my wife quit her job, she was paying into the company like RSP plan. And so when you leave your job, there's a whole thing where, okay, are you going to switch it to be DIY now? You're going to move all those investments into like Questrade or Wealthsimple or whatever the case may be? Or are you going to keep it with that company? And so, of course, they want you to keep it with that company, right? Because then they get to sell you these high fee mutual funds, right? And I remember that was the first time I ran into that kind of thing where I'm like, oh my goodness, these people, their sales skills are pretty impressive. Obviously, I didn't fall for it, but I can see someone that's not a nerd about this stuff. Like it can be very easy to fall into that trap. So anyways, I just want to raise that flag where you do have to be careful because they make it sound like they're just trying to help you.
That's
and
right.
they just have your family's best interest at heart because it's safety and security. And it's, but you're also getting thousands in commissions selling me this. You're not being as altruistic as you make it out to be, right? Anyway, so I just think, again, just great that you guys provide this. And I do think that's one way your firm has really differentiated itself in Canada in that you're very clear and clearly leaving some money on the table by not accepting these referral fees from these insurance places or these places that sell investments. You're keeping it completely impartial so that people can actually believe you.
Trust
and
us,
not be like, oh, Hannah said this, but I better go check with yet another financial planner because you know what I mean? So I think it's really great how you guys do that. And that's why I feel so comfortable referring listeners of the show to you guys, just because I know they're in good hands and I know you're not going to try to push them something because you don't have these conflicts of interest. So
thanks, Cornell.
Thanks.
Yeah. Awesome. Again, another Cornell rant. My apologies.
I love it.
I'm passionate about the subject because I can see so many people getting, for lack of a better word, ripped off in some cases and falling into some of these traps. Now, again, not to say that everyone in that industry is bad, but there are some bad apples and they tend to be good at sales.
Or even they might believe their own story quite a bit without enough evidence, without taking in enough news or evidence or running enough comparisons is another thing. It's maybe not
That's
even,
a great point.
sometimes I worry, sometimes it's not even bad apples. It's just those who just don't focus on continuing education or find enough differing opinions.
Or that's all that they know.
That's their mentor does that. Their firm only does that. So that's all they see. And so they just are used to the rhetoric. And that's,
they've been in that industry since they graduated university. And that's all. I know we ran into that, or my cousin ran into that with our ESPs where there was someone trying to sell them, getting them into one of these plans.
Those group ones, RESPs.
The really, really bad ones.
Those scholarship trust funds.
Don't get me started on those. That's my personal pet peeve.
Long story short, like you guys said, a lot of DIY, or like we talked about, a lot of DIY investors listening to this show. You can definitely do the RESP yourself. You don't need to outsource that.
You don't need that.
And go through what can be very much a nightmare where there's been like lawsuits about this stuff. It's crazy.
And unfortunately, sometimes people say, oh, aren't RESPs horrible? It's bad for kids' savings in general, right? If you have that opinion that RESPs are good for nothing, they don't grow enough, there's this horrible contract that you have to be a part of, that is not the experience of every Canadian, and you can open an RESP on your own and not have any of those problems. So sometimes I'll see that people have that opinion and it's just not true because they've heard from a family member who's had this horrible experience.
We've had that happen on our side. Our family member got really badly burned by one of these plans. And then when they found out that I invest in my kid's RESP, they're just like, oh my God, that's a ripoff. And it's, no. And then as soon as he said that, I'm like, okay, so clearly you were with one of these plans and got burned really badly. So you've got this perception of RESPs. But I bring it up because, they, like when you mentioned some people, if you're talking to someone that right out of university or college, they start working for one of these RESP group plans. And that's all they know. And they've been like, they drank that Kool-Aid. They've been drinking it for years. That's all they know. Then to them, it's idiotic not to go with us. Don't you care about your kids' education? And it's like, whoa.
It's so true. It's so true. They have their own blind spots. That's really what it is.
That's good. All right, so getting back to my questions here. Sorry, another thing I'm passionate about.
I love it.
You can tell Cornell has kids, right?
That's right. I'm loving the RESPs. Like with the matching, and then the asset allocation ETFs make it so easy now to do that. It's easier than ever not get burned by these companies. But again, they have very well developed sales pitches, so you have to be careful. Now, during our pre-interview, another question you told me you get frequently is from Canadians wondering if they are on track to reach FIRE, so financial independence, retire early, or just to retire comfortably in general. Now, the best answer that I've been able to find on this is to basically get an in-depth financial plan done, since really, like we already talked about, the financial independence number needed can vary very wildly from person to person, based on their circumstances and what they actually want to do in retirement. Are they going to go travel Europe, or are they going to buy some inexpensive cottage out in the wild and live that way? Obviously, your expenses are going to vary wildly. Can you speak to that, but also, provide us with some general rules or guidelines that Canadian investors can do themselves to at least get a rough estimate on what might be needed to achieve financial independence as a Canadian?
Sure. Thanks, Cornell. Yes, it is actually one of the most common questions that we get asked is relating to retirement. Or am I on track? And with regards to your little preface there regarding, there's really no easy answer. As Hannah had mentioned before, it depends. It's very personalized. I'm going to say it again, that annoying financial planner. Given that though, if let's say you have your own modeling or you're earlier in the game and you're not quite sure how much to put away, there are a couple of rule of thumbs that I'm sure your listeners are aware of, like the rule of 25, right? You try to save 25 times your annual expenses to be able to be retirement ready. So that's a general rule of thumb out there. And, it can work to give a little bit of guidance if you're just totally not sure and you're not the type that's comfortable running your own modeling. So that's, one guiding rule of thumb that I know a lot of do-it-yourselfers do follow. So that's in regards to building of the wealth. And really it comes down to, if this is what you're doing, it's good to check in to see where you're at and basically have an idea of where you're take a snapshot of your financial picture today. What is your net worth, right? What are your assets and what are your liabilities? So what is your net worth today? And you'll want to actually yearly track that to see if you're making the progress that you want. So that's very important. The second rule of thumb that's out there, and I've heard you talk about this before very in detail, is of course the 4% rule. So as you're approaching retirement, what is a safe withdrawal rate? And so the rule, as everyone likely is aware because they listen a lot to all your podcasts, Cornell, is you can safely withdraw 4% per year indexed to inflation. And it really assumes a 30-year retirement period. So again, it's a rule of thumb, but there are so many different variables. And the financial planner hat comes on, and number one, 30-year retirement period is not realistic for those that want to achieve FIRE or early financial independence, right? You're aiming to retire at 50. We know with longevity factors out there that you could easily live to 90 or beyond 100. There's more and more centenarians out there. And not only that, the big one being, what is your asset allocation in your portfolio? Are you conservative, a balanced, or an aggressive investor that has a lot of equities? That will impact these general rules of thumbs as well as taxation. So that 4% rule, all these rules, they don't factor in taxation and the different vehicles that we have readily available for our use. So these are some of the rule of thumbs out there. And I'm going to go back to your point of good guiding principles. But if you're especially, let's say within 10 years and you're getting close, that's when it's really great time to check in and either work with a planner who can help you with the modeling of projections, or our new objective self-directed retirement or financial plan to give you that check-in and to account for all those different variables that these general rules of thumb really don't. So that's my take on it. Hannah, did you have anything else to add?
I sure do. So that safe withdrawal rate of 4% was published in the 90s. And interestingly, it was based off a portfolio of 50% stocks, US stocks, and 50% US bonds. And so most Canadians are not going to have a portfolio that looks like that, right? So there's already a wrinkle in using that. He found that a 3% withdrawal rate might be absolutely safe for retirements of 50 years, right? Twee's absolutely on track that the 4% was for 30 years. But interestingly, I think it's Morningstar that recalculates a safe withdrawal rate every year, I think it is. And that number changes regularly. So a few wrinkles in using that. I find it a little bit inappropriate for using for the process of decumulation. It can be a good guideline for accumulating. But some serious considerations that Thuy was mentioning. Okay, not everybody has the same estate goals, right? A person who wants to leave assets to their heirs is going to have a different amount that they should be withdrawing every year compared to somebody who plans to die with zero. Interestingly, too, the spending patterns of retirees tends to be highest in the early years and tends to decrease even after accounting for increases in healthcare spending in later life. It tends to decrease in later life. So a steady spending pattern might not make a lot of sense. People are going to have significant CPP and OAS, which not only impacts the amount of income that they'll need to pull, but provides inflation-protected income and longevity protection. And then if their assets truly deplete to zero, their investment assets, a lot of Canadians are going to have their home equity as a financial backstop. Not everybody wants to use it, but it's worth thinking about. People who receive their CPP early are going to have less. People who defer later are going to have more. And few people spend the exact same amount of money every year. And in fact, most of the people I work with are used to saving and banking long term. They want to ensure that their bills and expenses are covered, but they're open to the idea of being flexible with their discretionary spending if poor market conditions arise. So like modern financial planning software has the ability to run hundreds of simulations of potential market performance to determine the viability of success based on varying investment returns. And I think it makes sense to spend a little bit of money annually to do that process, take advantage of those technology improvements with a financial planner, rather than being stuck with something that's quite rigid.
Yeah, and Thuy, you mentioned how the taxes are not included in the 4% rule, especially not Canadian taxes, because when this was done in the US. But even then, right? So the taxes, you mentioned how that's not included. But then same with the government benefits, right? Like obviously when they were doing this, when Bengen was doing this in the US, he wasn't like, oh, let's run this for Canada, factoring in CPP, OAS, GIS, and the Canada Child Benefit didn't even exist back then. But that's another thing too, right? Like in our case, we're in a bit of a different scenario because like we had like the early retirement thing and we still have kids. But for us, it's the CCB, Canada Child Benefit, was not factored into the 4% rule. And so that's something that obviously impacts it because it can be a pretty significant amount depending on how you manage everything. So again, to your point about how it's such a good, it is a useful guideline, I think, like a back of the napkin kind of thing.
Exactly. Back of the napkin.
That's very helpful. But then when it's, okay, guys, we're getting close here. Maybe we're 10 years out. Let's start fine tuning this because things are getting very real now. Like the portfolio's getting quite large. We can actually start optimizing now. And I think it's such a strong incentive for people to do that as well, because it might actually result in you being able to quit your full-time job literally years earlier, because there are so many different levers you can pull. So it's very much, imagine being able to leave like 3 years earlier just because you actually had a financial plan done and you made it custom to you, instead of just, 4% rule, that's what the blog says. Let's do 4%.
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly it, Hannah. But a really good point, Hannah. You mean people, and especially your listeners, who are pretty disciplined, they're really good at accumulating wealth. But to make that switch to, am I ready? Do I have enough? They question themselves. And so often they delay their retirement. Or often they spend on a strict budget, or they spend a lot less than what they have the ability to. Right? It's about balancing that, like giving yourself peace of mind, being able to live the life that you want and have that reassurance. So I find that 10-year mark is a really good checkpoint, because that's when you can start shifting and really fine tuning on the strategy and making a big difference when it comes to the tax planning side of things.
Yeah, I mentioned that in my last interview. Was like, in our case, that happened for sure, where I actually ended up over saving and I was getting like money anxiety, even though the portfolio was growing. So like the net worth's higher, but you're getting anxious. Like what gives? And I think it's because you're so used to just saving and accumulating and investing to switch, and now all of a sudden you're still got to support the family, and it's a long retirement. It adds these extra elements, and so
scary.
It can, and I feel I don't complain about it because it's a privileged position to be in, but it's still a challenge. Like it is, you're still feeling anxiety, so let's solve it.
For sure.
And so it's interesting how it's not always about the money. It's also about switching how you think about things and how you manage things and like systems and processes. And again, the value of having a second set of eyes to make sure there are no blind spots that you're missing. Because when you're in it, you're really in it. It's good to have someone that's not as in it and not as emotionally invested. Yeah.
I listened to a podcast recently that had a quote I just loved so much. It said, when you're in your own head, you're behind enemy lines. And the interpretation was, if you talk to somebody, you can think a lot clearer. And I just thought that was so interesting because you can't think clearly when it's just you.
Yeah. Especially when kids are involved, like in our case, very challenging to keep all emotions at bay when you're like, hey, I still got to feed my kids. Hey, I still want to learn post-secondary.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's
money's very emotional. Those fears are reasonable. And I find that a lot of people have those fears about like having objectively a large nest egg and still having those anxieties. Yeah. That's very normal. It's very common. Yeah. And those fears are just as valid as any others.
And I would say I'm more robotic than most. And more of just because my wife calls me a robot quite a few times. And even still,
Objective.
I ran into these like emotional, like, anxiety kind of issues. So it's like if a semi-robot gets anxiety, I can only imagine what like a normal person goes through. You know what I mean?
A robot who still had money experiences, right? We develop our money experiences by the age of 7. So depending on how you experience money and how that's impacted your way of thinking and created
for sure
money blocks and blocks in your mindset. It's about being aware of it and then working through and giving yourself the reassurance that you need.
Yeah. I was in denial for a long time about like the psychological stuff because there's the whole like psychological piece of the investing and financial planning. Before I was like, like I'm not gonna worry about that. Like I know the math.
We're all human.
And then over time, I'm just like, okay, I'm feeling stressed. Darn it, I'm not as robotic as I thought I was.
Yeah, that makes sense though. That makes sense. Yeah.
I guess my wife's happy because she's like, hey, he's human after all. All right, good. Awesome. So Hannah, when we get into topics such as this, one challenge that inevitably comes up is dealing with the risk of varying returns. And that's often referred to as the sequence of returns risks. Can you define what this is for anybody new to the concept? And can you each take me through maybe your favorite way or ways of dealing with this challenge, just to help ensure that we all have acceptably high odds of a successful retirement and that we don't run out of money once we do actually start living off our investments?
Okay. So sequence of returns risk is totally fascinating. In the accumulation phase, so pre-retirement, 2 investors who invested the same amount on the same days and earned an average of 4% rate of return for, you say, the previous 20 years, could have had vastly different returns each year and ended up with the same final net worth as long as their average rate of return was the same. The sequence of the returns every year doesn't matter, the accumulation phase. When you begin accumulating, though, you begin drawing money out of your portfolio. In fact, at age 72, you have to do that with your RSPs, which are now RIFs. So if the initial returns during your decumulation are poor or negative, and you make those withdrawals, which you're having to do, you are permanently and negatively impacting the value of your portfolio for life. If one investor has multiple years of negative returns at the outset of decumulation, and another investor has multiple positive years at the outset, but they both earn 4% on average throughout a 20-year period, the first investor could end up with significantly less than the second investor and potentially risk running out of money significantly sooner. So that's what sequence of returns risk is in retirement. The sequence of returns starts to matter. So there are multiple ways to deal with this, and it very much depends on the person. So a strategy I sometimes recommend for some people, and this is subject to nuance, of course, and the person, but is the cash wedge. And because it provides psychological peace of mind, and additionally, it aligns with the administrative concerns with decumulation that I find many retirees have. A cash wedge, just to remind everybody here, is in its simplicity, 1 to 3 years of expected income withdrawals are sold from the portfolio and placed in a risk-free investment remaining inside that account, like the RIF. So if markets do well, you sell your investments to fund the withdrawals. If markets are doing poorly, you use the risk-free cash wedge. And then the administrative point is that you can set up a systematic withdrawal plan from the high interest savings account to fund monthly RIF withdrawals. So that can make it a little bit easier. There has been some research shown that a cash wedge strategy might not perform as well as regularly rebalancing your portfolio. I think peace of mind and ease of administration are worth quite a lot. And I'm seeing more and more retirees with all equity strategies too. And I find they are particularly keen on a cash wedge strategy since it allows them to maintain that all equity strategy. Another idea might be being flexible with your withdrawals, your discretionary versus your fixed expenses, or even using product like an annuity, which are way more attractive these days than they have been in the past. And I know that won't be for everyone, but again, financial planning is individual.
When doing the cash wedge, when would you suggest, or what rule would you suggest investors employ to decide when they should refill that wedge? So let's say there was been like a 30% market drop, so they were just living off the cash wedge, the cash cushion for a while. Mm-hmm. But then, okay, markets have now recovered, they're doing well, or they're on their way up. Is there some sort of just from a mechanics standpoint, some way to say, okay, when X happens, then I should start refilling my cash wedge that I've depleted?
Yeah, it really depends on the person. Again, Cornell, like their risk tolerance, their risk appetite, how willing they are to watch the portfolio, right? Like people who don't watch very much, I might say do a 2-year cash wedge as an example, live off of it for 1 year, replenish every year. If things are crappy, wait another year, replenish up to 2 years again. That might be a strategy for somebody who doesn't want to watch. People who do watch, maybe it's keep 1 year cash wedge, always sell from the investments. It really depends on the person. Or somebody who's really risk tolerant, you might say just don't use a cash wedge. It really depends on the person. So we do a really thorough interview process when we meet people, get a sense of who they are and what they believe in and their values and all that, and develop a strategy that works with them but also helps them achieve their goals. So the cash wedge depends on the person, right? There's been some publications I've seen that recommended a 5-year cash wedge. Some recommend a 1 year. There's no really solid rule of thumb. Peace of mind is the goal here, especially with decumulation. I find this is a very stressful period for people. Like you said, Cornell, working on accumulation your whole life, this is a huge shift for people. Not only are you switching to decumulation, but you're retiring. Things are just changing immensely, and whatever we can do to create peace of mind is a totally valid strategy.
Interesting. Yeah, I asked because we use a bit of a cash wedge, and one thing that I've been trying to think of a way to think about it is when to actually refill it, like some sort of a rule-based method. Because I find without that, it's almost like you're trying to time the market, right? It's okay, I want to refill it. Okay, do I start refilling it when we're back at all-time highs? Do we start refilling it when we are net positive for the year? Do we refill it when we're break even to where it was before the drop? You know what I mean? I'm wondering if there are some rules or a rule I could use, because without that, it's just every time it's time to refill it or it's getting low, you start thinking about it and speculating, and that doesn't seem like the smart way to do it.
Okay, you could think of maybe four ways I would suggest maybe thinking about this. Number one, calendar year based. I feel like that would be the least emotional. January every year, once your RIF minimums, for example, those have been calculated. They're not applicable in your case, Cornell, but for some people that might be a good trigger. You've got those minimums, you do the sell, or if things are for negative returns for the last year, that might be your trigger to go on to using the withdrawals. So calendar based, or you could say, if returns are 0 or lower, then you don't. Or if returns are greater than 1, you don't. And I saw an interesting one too that said, it's a little more complicated, but it was comparing the last 5 years average return to what the trend is meant to be for that asset class. That might be the most technical way of doing it. But I think if you're that interested in personal finance, that you're willing to kind of track and measure and do
tracking
that,
moving averages, for each
then
index that you track.
Then maybe avoiding a cash wedge is better, because there is some research showing that a cash wedge can have a less optimal outcome than a regular rebalancing strategy. So I think depends on the person, but I would go with calendar unless returns have been poor.
Yeah, unless we just had a major 30% drop, that it's like,
Totally.
okay, maybe try to push it back as long as we can.
Yeah, for sure.
To let it bounce back kind of thing. But just
and you'll have noticed, during the past year, you will be prepared for this, right? You'll have heard. Your friends will be telling you. If you're retired, I'm sure all your friends will be talking about it.
Well, I find, if you're living off your portfolio, you do tend to keep an eye on it.
You watch that stuff
more so,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Especially people that have finance podcasts.
Exactly.
They probably check their investments even more often than they should.
And DIYers who listen to personal finance podcasts tend to do that. Yeah. So I don't think you're going to take a rule of thumb and, wreck things. I don't worry about that too much.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good. Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on. And again, just a reminder to all the listeners that if you would like that free introductory call, as well as a discount if you do decide to work with Hannah, Thuy, or their team. And again, they have that DIY new software that we spoke about, which sounds really cool. I'm going to have to ask you guys about that after the show. So I can have a new toy to play with. But so for anybody who wants to check that out, you can sign up for free over at buildwealthcanada.ca/plan, so PLAN, and then you can get that free appointment and the discount as well. And again, thank you guys so much for offering that discount to Build Wealth Canada listeners. And again, it's nice to be able to bring you guys on and refer people to you, knowing that they're in good hands and that you're it's just that there isn't none of that conflict of interest that exists so much in the industry in Canada. It gives me peace of mind knowing that I don't have to worry and that they're going to be in good hands. So thanks again, and until next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cornell. This is really great to be here.
Awesome. All right, until next time, take care. Bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share it with someone that you think may find it useful. And of course, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify is always super appreciated as well. I'd like to end with a big thanks to one of our sponsors who, apart from my investing course, literally keeps the entire Build Wealth Canada podcast and website free for you. Do you know why asset allocation ETFs have become so popular? Asset allocation explains over 90% of the variation in a portfolio's quarterly return. So it's no wonder Canadian investors are turning to these ETFs. Today's sponsor, BMO ETFs, offers these innovative all-in-one solutions with the BMO All Equity ETF, ZEQT, the BMO Growth ETF, ZGRO, the BMO Balanced ETF, ZBAL, and the BMO Conservative ETF, ZCON, and many more. BMO developed these to help provide investors with ETFs that offer broad diversification and are also low cost and simple to use. These ETFs invest in a number of underlying index-based ETFs and are rebalanced automatically back to your set asset allocation or mix of stocks and bonds. They offer a hands-free approach to investing that is built on disciplined weights to provide exposure to different geographies and sectors all in one solution. BMO actually offers 8 asset allocation ETFs, and you can learn more at bmoetfs.com.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.